We do begin tonight with the breaking news involving Donald Trump. His fate now in the hands of the jury. 7 men and 5 women began deliberating today, and about 4 hours into their deliberations, the signal inside that courtroom, the bell ringing, the jury and their first note sent to the judge with very specific requests for testimony to be read back to them. Now, that testimony involves a meeting at Trump Tower a little more than a year before the 2016 election. Donald Trump was part of that meeting. They want to hear testimony read back from the former publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, and Donald Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, as well, also at that meeting, his testimony too. Then, about an hour later, the bell ringing again. The jury then asking for the judge's jury instructions to be read again just hours after they were first delivered by the judge. So Dan Abrams is right here tonight with what this could all mean, and Aaron Katersky leading us off at the courthouse again tonight.
Tonight, the fate of Donald Trump, the first former president to ever face criminal charges, is now in the hands of the jury. And less than 4 hours into deliberations, a bell rang in court, signaling a note from the jurors. They wanted 4 pieces of key testimony read back to them, including 3 from David Pecker, the former National Enquirer publisher who bought and buried damaging stories for Trump, and 1 part of testimony from Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, about a Trump Tower meeting with Trump in August 2015, where prosecutors said the 3 men hatched a conspiracy to corrupt the 2016 election. An hour later, jurors sending a second note, asking Judge Juan Merchan to reread his jury instructions that he delivered just hours earlier. Merchan told them, as a juror, you are asked to make a very important decision about another member of the community. Merchan making the point to the jurors, think of the former president as another member of the community. Merchan also telling the jury you must set aside any personal opinions or bias you might have in favor of or against the defendant, and you must not allow any such opinions to influence your verdict. The jury's weighing 34 felony counts of falsifying business records that prosecutors say Trump used to conceal a $130,000 hush payment to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her story from voters before the election. Jurors must reach a unanimous decision of guilty on each of those counts. The jurors were given a laptop to take with them into deliberations, the computer loaded with nearly 300 pieces of evidence, including the checks Trump signed to reimburse Cohen, who wired Daniels the money, and the invoices Cohen sent that mentioned a retainer agreement that he said did not exist. Merchan told the jurors they may not decide the case based solely on Cohen's testimony because he's an accomplice to the alleged crime. In other words, the judge said, even if you find the testimony of Michael Cohen to be believable, you may not convict the defendant solely upon that testimony unless you also find that it was corroborated by other evidence. In closing arguments, defense attorney Todd Blanche telling the jury Cohen lied to you repeatedly, calling him the greatest liar of all time, the MVP of liars, and saying Trump's former fixer came to the witness stand bent on revenge with an axe to grind. Prosecutor Josh Steinglass said, we didn't pick him up at a witness store. The defendant chose him as a fixer because he was willing to lie and cheat. The 12-person jury, 5 women and 7 men, includes 2 native New Yorkers and 2 immigrants. There are 2 attorneys, a speech therapist, and a teacher. They all said they could be fair and impartial. The judge with a final message, urging them to listen to each other, but saying you should not surrender an honest view of the evidence simply because you want the trial to end or because you're outvoted. Trump speaking outside court.
Mother Teresa could not beat those charges, but we'll see.
And late today, inside that courtroom, David, defense attorneys and prosecutors stood over thick stacks of transcripts, hashing out which portions of the testimony to reread to the jury in addition to the judge's instructions. That's where the jury will pick up first thing tomorrow morning, David.
Aaron Katersky leading us off tonight at the courthouse. Aaron, thank you. Let's get right to our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, with us tonight to answer some of your questions, likely at home. First of all, this was really interesting because we heard the judge instruct the jury today not to base their decision guilty or not guilty based solely on Michael Cohen. Within hours, they asked their first request, very specific, and they want testimony not just from Michael Cohen, but from David Pecker from the National Enquirer. How significant was that, and what do you make of how specific their requests were so early on?
Well, look, it tells us that they're taking the prosecution's theory at least seriously. They're asking a lot of questions already about this 2015 meeting at Trump Tower, which prosecutors argued was the beginning of the scheme between David Pecker and Michael Cohen and Donald Trump. And then 3 of the 4 requests relate to specific conversations with Donald Trump himself. because that's one of the critical questions in the case, is exactly what did Donald Trump know about this? Not what was Michael Cohen doing, but what did Donald Trump know? So it's interesting that the jurors now laser focused on those meetings where Donald Trump was present or on the phone.
The bell goes off in the courtroom. That was their first request, and there were 4 parts to that request. An hour later, the bell rings again. They want the jury instructions from the judge read back to them again just hours later. A lot of folks at home might say, does this mean there's disagreement inside the jury room, or do they simply want to be clear-eyed about what it is they have to decide here?
Look, it could mean that there's some dissension, but New York law is a little different than most places and different than federal law in the sense that the jurors don't get to take the jury instructions back with them into the jury room. So if they have any questions about what the law is, they literally have to ask the judge to reread it in court. The question is going to be exactly what is he going to reread? But those jury instructions are critical, and that could be something that they end up fighting over at some point in the jury room.
All right, Dan Abrams with us here tonight. Dan and Aaron, our thanks to you both. We'll see you again tomorrow night.